Police SUVs surrounded Keanu Reeves's private jet just moments before takeoff. No warrant, no warning, just 3 officers boarding with a sealed letter. From a man Keanu hadn't seen in years, a man who vanished days ago. What was in that letter and why it was sent only to Keanu will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The engines of Keanu Reeves's private jet murmured steadily in the background, a low, comforting hum that usually signaled another smooth departure. The morning sun hung low over Van Nuys Airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac. It was supposed to be a quiet flight to Oregon, just another humanitarian trip. No press, no crew, just Keanu, a duffel bag, and the peace of being 30,000 feet above the noise. He sat in his usual seat near the front of the cabin, sipping black coffee from a ceramic mug, his thoughts already halfway to the meeting awaiting him. A rehabilitation center for veterans had invited him to speak privately with a small group of patients. No cameras, just connection. That was how he preferred it. Everything was calm, predictable, until it wasn't. Through the oval window, Keanu noticed a flicker of movement that didn't match the rhythm of airport operations. A vehicle moving too slowly. Then another. Within seconds, 4 black SUVs with tinted windows had pulled into formation around the aircraft. 2 angled at the nose. 2 blocked the rear. Uniformed officers stepped out, their movements crisp, deliberate. They ushered. He lowered his coffee mug. Inside the cockpit, the crew's voices crackled low over the intercom, quickly shifting from routine chatter to something far tenser. Then came the announcement. "Mr. Reeves," the pilot said, voice tight, controlled, "we have a situation. Law enforcement has surrounded the aircraft. They've requested permission to board. They say it's urgent." Keanu looked out again. One of the officers was on a radio. Another pointed directly at the jet. There was no panic in their posture, but something about their presence suggested this wasn't a mistake. This was coordinated, serious, and unexpected. "Open the door," Keanu said calmly, "and quit." The cabin attendant hesitated, unsure, then obeyed. In the moments that followed, the quiet stillness inside the aircraft became almost oppressive. The door hissed open, the staircase lowered, and the first footsteps echoed up the stairs like thunder. Keanu stood, heart steady, but every part of him alert. 3 officers stepped aboard, no weapons drawn, but clearly ready. At the front was a woman in a navy blue suit, with a badge clipped to her belt. Her eyes locked onto Keanu with something between apology and urgency. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice clear but respectful. "I'm Detective Carla Mendez, Los Angeles Special Investigations. I'm sorry to do this here, but time is critical." Keanu nodded once, slowly. "What's this about?" The detective paused, then reached into her coat. She pulled out a sealed envelope, a simple one, white, handwritten, no logo. Just one thing on the front, for Keanu Reeves. "Only." Keanu's eyes narrowed, his breath caught just slightly in his chest. "We believe you may be the last person this man tried to reach before he disappeared," Detective Mendez said softly. Keanu took the envelope with both hands. Something about the handwriting sent a ripple through him. It was familiar, vaguely, enough to stir a memory that hadn't surfaced in years. Keanu didn't sit down. He held the envelope between his fingers, the paper slightly bent from the pressure of his grip. A part of him didn't want to open it. Not yet. Not with 3 strangers watching. He studied the handwriting again. It was slightly shaky, uneven, as if written under stress. But there was something unmistakably familiar in the way his name was spelled. Something personal, intimate. "Who gave this to you?" Keanu asked, without looking up. Detective Mendez exchanged a glance with the male officer behind her, then answered carefully. A woman came to our station yesterday morning. She said her husband had been missing for 48 hours, said he left home late Wednesday night in a panic, claiming he had to deliver something to you. Keanu finally looked up. Hal didn't say where he was going, Mendez continued. Only that it was urgent, that he needed to get something into your hands. This letter was found locked in a safe at their home. His wife discovered it after speaking with one of our missing persons officers. Keanu exhaled slowly, his mind already sorting through names, faces, fragments of time. He asked, "What's his name?" Adrian Soto. The name hit like a whisper cutting through silence. Keanu's posture shifted just slightly, the faintest trace of emotion flickering in his eyes. He knew the name. Not well, not from fame or business, but from something quieter, something human. Adrian worked security at the Veteran Rehab Center in Flagstaff, Keanu said after a pause. I met him in 2018. He helped us during an event there, stayed behind after everyone left. I think he offered to walk a homeless guy back to the bus stop because it was dark. Detective Mendez nodded. We have confirmation he worked that post, but what we don't understand is why he chose you. Keanu didn't answer. He sat down slowly in his seat, the envelope still unopened. He could feel the weight of it now. Not just the physical object, but the gravity behind it. A man he barely knew had vanished. And somehow he had decided that Keanu Reeves was the only person he trusted enough to receive a sealed message. Was there a note? Keanu asked. Anything else? Mendez shook her head. Just this envelope. No fingerprints other than his. It hadn't been tampered with. His wife said she never saw it until yesterday. Keanu turned it over in his hands. No return address, no indication of what was inside. But it wasn't just paper. It was a plea. I don't know why he trusted me, Keanu murmured. But I'm going to find out. He slid a finger under the envelope flap and slowly began to tear it open. The officers didn't speak. They simply stood there, watching as the cabin filled with tension heavy enough to make the air feel thick. Keanu unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second, then they froze on the third. His jaw clenched, and his breath caught in his chest. Keanu lowered the letter into his lap, staring straight ahead, not blinking. Whatever was written on that page had changed the atmosphere inside the jet. The hum of the engines still vibrated faintly beneath them, but the stillness in the cabin had become something else, something colder, the kind of quiet that follows the breath right before impact. Detective Mendez leaned forward slightly. Is everything all right, Mr. Reeves? Keanu's voice came low. It's not a letter. What do you mean? It's a confession. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Or maybe a warning. He handed her the page. She took it carefully, reading the lines to herself. Her brows drew closer with each sentence. When she finished, she handed it to the officer beside her and looked back at Keanu with a quiet urgency. It mentions a fund, she said. A veterans housing initiative, some kind of fraud. Keanu nodded. I helped launch that project in Arizona back in 2019. Adrian was around then, but I never knew he was involved beyond security. The second officer finished reading and whistled under his breath. He names people, contractors, shady bookkeeping, says someone threatened him if he went public. Mendez's tone shifted. He claims lives were at risk, that donations meant for housing went to shell companies, that someone used your name, your image, to raise trust in the project. And when Adrian started looking deeper, he says they told him to back off. Keanu pressed his hands together, elbows on his knees. He remembered that campaign. He remembered standing in front of cameras, smiling beside board members, trusting their mission. He'd believed in it, put his name on it, visited the construction sites, hugged the families moving into those homes. "Why me?" he asked aloud, more to himself than anyone in the room. Why did he come to me with this? Mendez sat down across from him, softer now. Maybe because you listened when nobody else did? Maybe because you were the only one who treated him like more than a uniform. The jet cabin was still. No one moved. No one even reached for their radio. Then Keanu looked up, his voice clear. "So what happens now?" Mendez replied, "We were hoping you'd ask that." She stood, motioning to her team. "We're not just looking for a missing person, Mr. Reeves. We think Adrian may have uncovered something far bigger than fraud, and we think he knew someone would try to stop him. That's why he left you this." Keanu stood as well, looking out the window one last time at the line of SUVs and officers waiting near the stairs. A man he barely knew had trusted him with a final message. And now, there was no turning back. Whatever Adrian Soto had found, it was enough to stop a plane from leaving the ground. And Keanu Reeves was about to find out why. The morning had started like any other travel day. Keanu arrived at Van Nuys Airport just after sunrise, wearing dark jeans, a simple blazer, and sunglasses that masked the soft weariness in his eyes. A familiar driver dropped him off at the private terminal entrance. He carried no entourage, no film crew, just a weathered duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and a quiet sense of purpose. Inside the hangar, his jet waited patiently on the tarmac. Engines dormant, steps folded. The flight crew had already begun pre-checks. Keanu nodded at the staff as he entered, offering a half smile to the flight attendant, who handed him a fresh mug of black coffee. It was strong. No sugar. Exactly how he liked it. His assistant, Mark, stood waiting near the aircraft door with a folder under one arm and a phone pressed to his ear. "We're all set," Mark said as he hung up the call. "Weather's perfect. The rehab center is expecting you by noon. They've prepped a private group. 6 vets, quiet room, no press. Just the way you want it." Keanu nodded. "Thanks, Mark." Mark handed him the folder. "Also, this came yesterday. A letter from one of the veterans you're meeting. Staff said he insisted it be delivered before your visit." Keanu raised a brow. He took the envelope and gently opened it. The letter inside was handwritten on lined paper. The penmanship was rough, the ink smudged in places. He started reading. "Mr. Reeves, I know I'm not the kind of guy most people write to, but they told me you were coming, and I've watched your movies more times than I can count. Not because of the action, though those are awesome, but because you look like someone who gets it. You don't talk much, you just show up. You don't fake it, that matters. I've been here at the center for 9 months now. I've had hard days, real bad ones, but I'm trying. I just wanted to say thank you. For coming. For not forgetting us. See you soon. Jonas B., former Corporal, USM." Keanu folded the letter slowly, holding it in both hands for a moment longer than necessary. Then he placed it back in the envelope and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He looked out the jet's window. The sun had begun to rise higher now, painting the sky in soft golds and cool blues. Everything felt still. For a moment, the world was quiet in a way he treasured. Then something shifted. Beyond the corner of the hangar, 2 plainclothes individuals emerged from a black SUV. They weren't airport staff. They moved differently, purposefully. One of them flashed a badge at the airport's front gate guard. Keanu narrowed his eyes slightly but said nothing, just watched. "Pilot says we're good to go in 20, Mark added, checking his watch. "Should be a smooth ride. You'll have a little time to prep before the meet." Keanu gave a small nod, but his attention lingered on the figures outside. Something didn't feel right. The jet's interior welcomed Keanu like it always did. Subdued lighting, muted leather, the faint scent of cedar oil and clean air. He settled into his usual seat, fastening the lap belt with quiet hands. His body relaxed, but his eyes still fixed on the window. The same 2 plainclothes figures had now moved toward the side of the hangar, speaking with someone in a reflective vest. Keanu watched their posture. Nothing aggressive, nothing loud, but something about it stayed with him. They weren't airport security, not flight crew either. No logos, no ID tags. They had the presence of people trained not to be noticed, until they needed to be. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves. This is Captain Sloan. We're preparing to taxi in approximately 5 minutes. Flight time is 2 hours and 37 minutes. Weather is clear across the board. Should be a smooth ride into Portland. Sit back and relax. We'll have you on the ground ahead of schedule." Keanu leaned back in his seat, but his mind wasn't quite ready to rest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter again. Jonas's handwriting. The rough honesty. He reread the line. "You don't fake it. That matters." A soft ache grew in his chest. He didn't know why those words hit him harder than usual. Maybe because this trip was meant to be quiet, meaningful, not promotional, not strategic, just human. Just a reminder that presence still matters, even in a world obsessed with performance. He slipped the letter back into his pocket, then turned his attention back to the hangar. The 2 officers were gone. The SUV had disappeared too. He took a sip of coffee, staring into the middle distance, trying to convince himself it had just been routine. Maybe they were inspecting another aircraft. Maybe it had nothing to do with him. "Shooter, I..." Still, he reached for his phone and texted Mark. "Did you see the 2 guys outside by the gate?" A few seconds later, Mark replied, "Yeah, not TSA. Looked like plainclothes cops." Keanu frowned. "Any idea what they wanted?" Mark replied with a single word. "Nope." Then came the familiar rumble beneath his feet, the engine spooling to full power. The cabin pressure shifted slightly. The jet began its slow roll across the tarmac, taxiing toward the active runway. Keanu closed his eyes, breathing in slowly through his nose, trying to shake off the tension that had crept into his body like a draft under a locked door. That's when the jet stopped. No lurch, no turbulence, just a stop. Keanu's eyes opened. The jet hadn't reached the end of the taxiway yet. They were only halfway down. It was too early to pause, unless there was another plane crossing. He looked outside again, and that's when he saw them. 4 black SUVs moving in from different angles. The 4 SUVs approached in quiet formation. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the slow, intentional movement of vehicles that didn't need to announce their authority. 2 came from the west side of the runway, pulling in at a diagonal toward the nose of the jet. The other 2 curved in behind, flanking the tail like sentries, sealing an exit. Keanu leaned closer to the window, eyebrows narrowing. The pilots hadn't said anything yet. No alert from the tower. No commotion. Just the steady arrival of something that didn't belong on a routine morning flight. The plane rolled to a complete stop. The hum of forward motion faded into a low idle. Cabin lights remained steady. The flight attendant seated and buckled, per protocol. But something in her eyes told Keanu she had seen it too. She looked toward the cockpit, then down the aisle. She didn't move. A voice cracked over the intercom again, more measured this time. "Mr. Reeves," the pilot said, noticeably slower than before. "We've been advised by airport control that law enforcement has requested to board the aircraft immediately. They have proper clearance and they've surrounded us. I repeat, they're requesting to board." Keanu said nothing at first. He simply sat there, eyes locked out the window. From his seat, he could see 2 officers stepping out of the lead SUV, walking with calm but firm steps toward the cabin stairs. One held something in her hand, a small case or folder. The other kept one hand on his belt, scanning the area methodically. Mark messaged again. "What the hell is going on?" Keanu didn't respond. He stood. With deliberate motion, he placed his mug on the tray table, adjusted his jacket, and took a slow breath. Then he walked to the front of the cabin and pressed the call button. The flight attendant rose immediately, her face pale. "They're requesting to come on board?" he asked her. "Yes, sir. The pilot's waiting on your approval. They say it's urgent." That it concerns you personally. Keanu nodded once. Let them on. She radioed the cockpit. A moment later, the cabin door hissed and swung open. Cool morning air rushed in, and with it, the unknown. 3 officers stepped aboard, 2 men and 1 woman, all in civilian dress, but with clear identification clipped to their belts. The woman stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," she said. "I'm Detective Carla Mendez with Los Angeles Special Investigations. I'm sorry for the intrusion, but we had no other option. This couldn't wait." Keanu studied her face. Calm, measured, but underneath it, a deep urgency. She reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "There's been a disappearance," she said. "A man named Adrian Soto. He left behind a message addressed to you, personally. We believe you may be the last person he tried to contact." Keanu took the envelope. He didn't recognize the name. Not yet. But as his eyes scanned the handwriting, something cold and familiar stirred in his chest. And nothing about the day felt routine anymore. Detective Carla Mendez stepped farther into the cabin, her shoes tapping quietly on the floor. She didn't come across as aggressive or confrontational, but something about her demeanor demanded full attention. Her suit was pressed and plain, her eyes sharp and unreadable. She held the sealed envelope firmly in one hand, but didn't offer it again just yet. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice low and respectful. "I know this is not the way anyone wants to start their morning, but we didn't have the luxury of waiting." Keanu remained standing, his body angled slightly between the officers and the cockpit, his mind racing behind an expression that gave nothing away. "What is this about?" he asked, calm but direct. Detective Mendez took a small step forward, the other 2 officers hanging back just inside the open cabin door. Earlier this week, a man named Adrian Soto was reported missing. 48 hours with no contact. His wife filed the report yesterday. What's unusual is what we found in his home. Keanu blinked once. The name had already been mentioned, but it wasn't familiar enough to spark recognition. Still, he nodded slowly, listening. Mendez continued. He left behind a letter, locked in a small fireproof safe. No fingerprints on the contents except his. The letter is addressed specifically to you. She held the envelope out again, more deliberately this time. Keanu took it from her hand, gently. He turned it over in his palm, studying the front. His name was written carefully in blue ink, slightly shaky, not rushed, but with intention. To Keanu Reeves. Only. Something about the handwriting began to stir a faint, far-off memory. A name tugged at the corner of his mind, something vague and unfinished. The detective went on. Adrian worked security at a veterans rehabilitation charity in Arizona. 2018. It was an event you supported. Several fundraisers, a few media-free visits. That clicked. Keanu's posture shifted just slightly. He turned toward the couch, along the side wall of the jet, and sat down slowly, placing the envelope beside him. "I remember that," he said. "The place outside Flagstaff, converted lodge for injured vets. We ran some workshops there, art therapy, housing support, mental health services." Mendez nodded. "That's the one." Adrian was on the night security team, worked there for about 18 months. His employment records were clean, no red flags. He wasn't on your staff, but you would have crossed paths. Keanu looked down at the envelope, then back at Mendez. "I think I do remember him now. Quiet guy, younger. Didn't speak much unless spoken to. Kind eyes." Mendez softened slightly. "That matches what his wife told us. He wasn't loud, but people trusted him. That's probably why he was able to see what he saw." Keanu leaned back, brows narrowing slightly. What exactly did he see? Mendez exchanged a glance with her colleagues, then took a seat across from him. "That's why we're here." Detective Mendez set a slim file on the table between them. She didn't open it right away. Her eyes stayed on Keanu's for a moment longer, as if weighing how much to say and how quickly to say it. "Mr. Reeves, "We believe Adrian uncovered something illegal," she said carefully. "Something tied to a nonprofit you were once associated with. Though, from everything we've seen so far, your name was likely used without your full knowledge." Keanu didn't move. "Which nonprofit?" Mendez opened the file and pulled out a photo. It showed a group of men in suits and women in business casual attire posing beneath a banner, "Homes for Honor." Keanu was in the photo too, standing off to the side, wearing jeans and a black shirt. No smile, just the quiet expression of someone who showed up because he believed in what the banner stood for. "That one," Mendez said. "Homes for Honor? You were one of their public ambassadors when they launched in 2018, helped raise money, visited the Flagstaff site, donated privately." Keanu nodded slowly. "They told me the funds were going toward building transitional housing for veterans, emergency beds, on-site care. I did site visits, I saw construction crews." "What's the problem?" "That's where things get complicated," Mendez replied. "According to Adrian's wife, he started looking into something about a year ago. Old contracts, financial inconsistencies, missing permits. He told her he found names on the payroll that didn't match any active employees, vendors that didn't exist, payments made to consulting firms that were registered to P.O. boxes in Nevada." Keanu's jaw tightened. "And he left a letter for me?" he asked. Mendez nodded. "He didn't trust going public. He didn't trust law enforcement right away either. His wife says he was scared, but he said if anything ever happened, he wanted the truth to reach someone who would actually do something about it. Someone not owned." Keanu's voice dropped, quiet but steady. "He thought I wasn't owned." "Hell trusted you," Mendez said. "That's what she told us. He said you were the only one who ever treated him like a human being." Keanu looked away for a moment, his throat tightening unexpectedly. "I remember him now," he said quietly. "One of the few who didn't want anything from me. He stayed after events to clean up chairs, didn't try to get a photo. I asked him once if he was former military and he just said, 'Army, 2 tours, nothing heroic.' Then he went back to locking the doors." Mendez leaned in slightly. "That's the kind of man who leaves behind a warning." Keanu reached for the envelope beside him again. "You said he's been missing?" 48 hours, she confirmed. "No phone activity. His car still in the garage. Wallet left behind. No indication he packed to leave, just vanished. And this letter's the only thing he left?" Mendez nodded. "As far as we know." Keanu held the envelope in both hands, feeling the subtle ridge of a folded page inside. He hadn't opened it yet. Not fully. A part of him wasn't ready. Not until he understood what Adrian had been walking into and walking away from. "What about his wife?" he asked. "Is she safe?" Mendez nodded. "She's cooperating. We've placed her under quiet protection for now. No press, no public statements. She's frightened, but stable. She's the one who found the safe in their home office, hidden under a loose floorboard. Said Adrian never mentioned it." Keanu looked up sharply. "He never told her?" "Not about the safe, not about the letter. She said he kept most of his worry inside, but she noticed he hadn't been sleeping. Said he'd wake up some nights muttering things like, 'They're watching,' or 'I need to get it to him.'" Keanu exhaled slowly, gaze returning to the envelope. "He meant me." "That's our belief," Mendez replied. "We don't think Adrian trusted traditional channels, not with this. We've seen situations like this before. Whistleblowers who wait too long, then find themselves isolated, paranoid, sometimes for good reason." Keanu's mind was racing. He remembered the Veterans Center, the dusty air of Arizona, Adrian standing quietly near the back entrance, eyes always scanning, but not in fear, just alertness, the kind soldiers never lose. "Did he send any emails, leave any files?" Keanu asked. "Not to our knowledge," Mendez answered. But his wife did find a small flash drive taped under the bottom drawer of his desk. It's encrypted. We're working on it now. Keanu stared down at the letter again. Wait for me, bring this to me on the runway, he asked. Why not call my team or wait until I landed? Mendes hesitated before answering. Because his disappearance might not be voluntary, she said, and because we think he was close to exposing something bigger, possibly criminal, possibly dangerous, and time matters. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Mr. Reeves, we don't know exactly what Adrian found, but he was scared enough to hide this message. Scared enough to name you as the one person he believed wouldn't ignore it. That puts you closer to the center than you realize. Keanu looked her directly in the eyes. You think someone took him? We think someone wanted him silenced, Mendes replied. Silence settled over the cabin. The other officers stood quietly, watching the exchange unfold. Keanu finally broke the pause. If I read this letter, and what he says is credible, Mendes didn't blink. Then we'll need your help. Because his information alone may not be enough, but your voice could make sure it doesn't disappear with him. Keanu opened the envelope, and the first words he read would change everything. Keanu sat still, the envelope finally torn open, the paper inside pulled out with care. The edges were slightly curled, the ink smudged faintly at the bottom corner, as if it had been folded and handled again and again. He unfolded it slowly. There were no formal greetings, no dates, just words written in a hurried, uneven hand. Keanu began reading aloud, voice steady but quiet. Mr. Reeves, if you're reading this, it means I either ran out of time or ran out of choices. I didn't want to leave a letter. I wanted to speak to you in person. But I don't think I'll get that chance now. Keanu paused, swallowing hard before continuing. I've uncovered something. Something bad. It's buried beneath the surface of Homes for Honor, but it's there. At first, I thought it was just lazy bookkeeping, payments that didn't add up, staff who never showed up. But it's more than that. I started following the money. What I found scared me. He stopped again and looked at Detective Mendes. Her eyes were locked on the page, following every word. Keanu continued. There's a financial trail that leads to a for-nonprofit shell company in Florida. The nonprofit is funneling donor money into fake construction bids. I traced the addresses, empty lots, no builds, no contracts filed with local authorities. The project was supposed to be helping veterans get clean, get housed, get back on their feet. Instead, it's become a front. His voice slowed as he read the next line. I think they're using your name to keep it running. Your face is still on brochures. I found a donation drive from last month that used an old photo of you shaking hands with Christopher Ryland. Keanu leaned back in his seat at the mention of the name. His jaw tightened. He remembered Ryland, a polished, fast-talking tech executive who had pitched Keanu on the original vision for Homes for Honor. Keanu had agreed to lend his name and show up to one event, based on what he thought was a genuine mission to help veterans. He's still tied to the board? Keanu asked Mendes, not looking up. Mendes nodded. On paper, he stepped down 2 years ago, but we've found links between his holding company and several of the consultants the nonprofit hired afterward. Keanu refocused on the letter, his fingers gripping the edge of the page a little tighter now. People have tried to raise concerns. I know of at least 2 former employees who disappeared from the records after speaking up. One of them sent an anonymous email to a local paper, but it was never published. The other? His name's been wiped from internal logs. It's like he never worked there. But I met him. I shook his hand. Keanu's chest ached as he read on. If something happens to me, don't let it die with me. Keanu stared at the last sentence for a long moment, then placed the letter on the table beside him. His hand lingered near it, but he didn't touch it again. His other hand rested against his knee, curled into a soft fist. The silence in the jet's cabin was heavy. Detective Mendes spoke first. That's the line that made us move faster. When someone uses words like that, if something happens to me, it stops being a missing persons case, it becomes something else. Keanu nodded slowly, but his expression was hard to read. His mind was no longer just on Adrian. It had turned inward, backward, to a gala in 2019 where Christopher Rylan had introduced him to smiling investors, to a veterans retreat where he'd stood beside a camera crew while a ribbon was cut, to quiet conversations with struggling former soldiers who had believed in the promise of the place. He had believed in it too, but now he picked up the letter again. "I've made copies of what I found," it continued. "I've stored them offline. If I disappear, someone will try to destroy the truth. But I trust you to act. I don't want fame. I don't want revenge. I just want it to stop." He glanced up at Mendez. "Did you find the files?" "Not yet," she said. His wife mentioned that he was using encrypted drives, said he kept 2 laptops, one for work, one he never let her touch. That second one is missing. Keanu nodded again. He's smart. He knew what he was risking. Mendez looked thoughtful. "You've dealt with people like this before? People who carry guilt like a weight. People who try to do the right thing and pay the price for it." Keanu let out a quiet breath. They don't always know how to speak loudly, but when they finally do, it's usually too late. He looked back at the letter and finished reading the last lines. "I'm tired of being quiet. I tried to report this, I tried to stay invisible, but the deeper I looked, the more I realized this isn't just corruption. It's targeted, calculated, and it's happening because no one is watching. You were the only one who ever asked me how I was doing. I didn't know what to say then, but I do now. I'm scared, Mr. Reeves, but I'm ready. If you're reading this, it means I tried. Please don't let them bury it." Keanu didn't say anything for a while. He folded the letter again, this time carefully, like it was something sacred. Then he pressed his palm against it and looked up. "I think he already knew they'd come for him," he said softly. Mendez responded just as quietly, "And he hoped you'd finish what he started." Keanu leaned back against the seat, one hand still resting on the folded letter. For a moment, the hum of the idle jet engines returned to the front of his awareness, like a low, distant reminder that he was supposed to be somewhere else. Oregon, a rehab center, a quiet meeting with men who had been through war, but now he sat grounded by a truth deeper than paperwork, by a message written by a man who felt like he had no other options left. Detective Mendes watched him closely but didn't rush him. Her tone had shifted from procedural to personal. She understood what this meant, not just to the case, but to Keanu. "We've been investigating homes for honor off the books for over a year," she said. "Tips come in, but they're vague. Disappear when followed. Adrian's the first person who gave us something concrete. Names, patterns, payment trails. But his voice won't be enough on its own." Keanu looked at her, calm but resolute. "You want me to speak publicly?" "We want the public to listen," she replied. "And that only happens when someone with reach tells the story." He shook his head slightly. "I don't care about reach. I care about truth. And Adrian didn't ask for a camera. He asked for help." "We know," Mendez said. "But the people behind this, they're banking on silence, on the world being too distracted to notice one more missing vet, one more stolen dollar." Keanu glanced down at the envelope again, then slowly tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I gave them my name," he said. "I let them print it on banners. I stood next to that man, Rylan. I thought I was helping. But if my name gave people false hope, if it was used to shield corruption, then I have a responsibility." Mendez nodded once. "So what's your next move?" Keanu looked toward the front of the plane. The stairs were still down. The officers at the bottom hadn't left. The jet engines remained on standby, waiting for clearance that would never come. He turned back to Mendez. His voice was quiet but unshakable. "I'm not going anywhere." She raised an eyebrow. "You're canceling your flight?" He nodded. "This can't wait. I need to speak to Adrian's wife. I want to see the safe, the house. I want to talk to whoever's left at that nonprofit. Off the record if necessary. I want to know exactly how far this goes." Mendez gave a small, approving nod. "You're sure?" Keanu's response was immediate. "Someone trusted me with the last thing they had left. I'm not turning away from that." The detective stood and extended her hand. "Then we're with you." Keanu shook it firmly. Whatever Adrian Soto had uncovered, it had just found its voice. The images in Keanu's memory came back slowly, like film reels unspooling after years in storage. They weren't loud memories, no speeches, no red carpets, just quiet corners of a place that had meant something to him. It was 2018, Arizona. The heat was unforgiving that summer, but the center stood like a calm refuge in the desert. An old lodge converted into a rehabilitation site for veterans struggling with addiction and PTSD. The nonprofit Homes for Honor had helped secure funding. Keanu had lent his name and presence. He hadn't done it for press. In fact, he'd insisted on minimal publicity. No media inside, no announcements, just presence. That's where he first noticed Adrian Soto. He hadn't been introduced formally. Keanu had just seen him at the edge of every event, quietly monitoring doors, helping late arrivals find their way, keeping his radio volume low so as not to disturb group sessions. He never wore sunglasses, even in the sun. Said it made him feel disconnected from the people he was protecting. At the time, Adrian looked like just another security contractor. Ex-military, clean-cut, always alert. But the more Keanu watched, the more he realized Adrian wasn't like the others. He didn't stand back and fade away once the crowd left. He stayed behind. One night, after a long day of workshops, Keanu had come back outside to grab his phone charger from the SUV. The sun had gone down, the air was finally cooling. As he rounded the building, he saw Adrian seated on a bench near the staff parking lot. His elbows rested on his knees, his head was bowed. His shoulders moved gently, like someone trying not to cry, but failing. Keanu paused. He didn't call out, didn't ask questions. He just walked up quietly and sat on the other end of the bench. They sat in silence for nearly a minute. Then Adrian spoke without turning. "I've seen too much," he said, his voice raw and small. "But I try to do right." Keanu didn't reply. He just nodded, letting those words hang in the night air. Then Adrian stood, wiped his eyes, and said, "Have a good night, sir," before walking back toward the building. Keanu remembered watching him go, thinking there was something heavy hanging on the man's back that no armor could protect. He'd almost forgotten that moment, until now. Sitting on the grounded jet, with Adrian's letter in his jacket and Detective Mendez across from him, Keanu began to understand. That man on the bench wasn't just grieving ghosts of war. He had already started uncovering something. Maybe he hadn't had all the pieces then, but something was wrong, and he felt it. He had been carrying it quietly, and now it had caught up with him. Keanu turned to Detective Mendez, his voice quieter than before. "He said it that night like it was a confession. But I didn't realize then he might have already been in danger." Mendez gave a slow nod. "We don't think Adrian just stumbled into this recently. Our records show he started pulling financial statements over a year ago. But based on what you're describing, it could have started even earlier." Keanu pressed a hand to his chin, trying to recall more. "There was this one moment," he said. "We were leaving after a volunteer dinner. It was late. A homeless vet showed up at the front steps, no shoes, bleeding from a busted toe. One of the organizers told him to come back during business hours." Keanu paused, eyes distant. Adrian didn't say a word. He walked straight over, took off his own boots, handed them to the guy, then walked him to the medical bay barefoot. I remember thinking, that's not protocol, that's just human. Mendez listened closely. His wife said something similar, that Adrian couldn't walk past a person in pain. She said it wore him down over time, especially after he started seeing where the money was really going. Keanu's eyes met hers. What do you mean? Mendez opened her folder and pulled out a thin stack of printed financial logs. Adrian had been compiling these. Some of it he printed, some he stored on hard drives. The nonprofit's public site said they were spending $1,400,000 0 cents on new modular units for emergency shelter in Prescott and Globe. But the city records show no permits, no zoning approvals, no inspections. She slid the paper across to Keanu. He picked it up slowly. Even at a glance, it was clear. Vendor names that looked unfamiliar, payment dates that skipped around, receipts that looked copy-pasted. Did Adrian confront anyone? Keanu asked. Not directly, according to his wife, but he mentioned that someone warned him to stop asking questions. He said the warning didn't come from the nonprofit, at least not officially. He thought it came from outside. Maybe a partner organization. Maybe someone laundering money through the charity. Keanu exhaled hard. And the board? Billy gone silent. Christopher Ryland hasn't made a public statement in over a year, and the current director claims the books were clean when he took over. But here's the part that matters. 3 days before Adrian disappeared, someone logged into the nonprofit's back-end systems and erased 6 months' worth of expense data. Keanu's heart dropped. You're saying someone wiped the records? Mendez nodded. We're working to recover the backups now, but it's deliberate, not accidental. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. Keanu looked down at the letter again. The words Adrian wrote. The weight of his fear. His decision to keep going anyway. Hell knew this could happen, Keanu said. He still did it. Detective Mendez leaned forward, her voice steady but lower. People like Adrian don't come along often. He wasn't a whistleblower in the traditional sense. No press tour, no lawsuits. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted to stop something before it got worse. Keanu kept his eyes on the financial records. Numbers, dates, names. All of it technical, all of it lifeless. Until you remembered what they stood for. Promises. Trust. Vets who thought someone was finally showing up for them. He looked up. He was trying to protect the people we were supposed to be helping. Mendez nodded. We believe so. That's why the timing of the data deletion matters. It wasn't just panic. It was a move to erase everything he was gathering before it reached the wrong or the right hands. Keanu stood slowly, pacing a short distance in the cabin. His thoughts circled back to Arizona, to the way Adrian always stood a little apart from everyone. How he never inserted himself into conversations, never asked for favors, never expected recognition. He was one of those men who moved silently but carried the weight of every decision like it could shape the lives of others. I wish I had talked to him more, Keanu said quietly. Asked him what was going on. Maybe he would have told me. Maybe this would have come out sooner. Mendez didn't rush to correct him, but her next words were firm. Chose you for a reason. We think that matters more than timing. Keanu stopped pacing and turned to face her. What happens next? We're building a case, she said. But the more we dig, the more we realize the roots go deeper than just one charity. Ryland has connections to at least 2 other nonprofits that follow the same pattern. Flashy marketing, celebrity endorsements, and a lot of missing dollars. And Adrian, he had begun cross-referencing all 3. Keanu's breath caught. He was going after the whole network. It's what it looks like, slowly, quietly, and without support. Keanu moved back to the table and sat again. He reached for the letter one last time, but this time he didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew what it said, and what it meant. Adrian had seen too much, but he'd still tried to do right, even when he knew it might cost him everything. Keanu looked at Mendez. "Take me to the house," he said. "I want to see where he lived, where he worked. Whatever's left, files, journals, anything. If he left something behind, I want to help finish it." Mendez nodded without hesitation. And with that, the quiet man who had once walked barefoot to help another had now left behind a trail of truth. And Keanu Reeves was ready to walk it. Detective Mendez stood at the cabin door, briefing her team over a secure channel. They had planned to fly north, interview 2 whistleblowers who had contacted her department weeks ago. One had agreed to meet near Eugene, the other in a small town outside Portland. The case was moving, and now that they had Adrian's letter, it was moving faster. "We leave in 2 hours, Mendez told Keanu. "Our team in Oregon is standing by. They're already gathering additional documents from the shelters affiliated with Homes for Honor. We'll cross-search them with the data Adrian left behind." Keanu listened carefully, then shook his head. "I'm not going to Oregon." Mendez looked surprised. "We were hoping you could come. Your presence would help secure the interviews." "I'm not saying no to the case," Keanu clarified. "I'm saying I'm staying here. I need to go to Adrian's house. I need to talk to his wife. I need to see the world he lived in." He said it with a calm that made the entire cabin still. Mendez didn't argue. She understood. Keanu wasn't a figurehead. He never had been. "I'll reroute one of my detectives to go with you," she said. "Officer Garland is local. She knows the case." "Thank you," Keanu replied. As Mendez turned back to her team, Keanu took out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in nearly a year. "Jackson," the voice on the other end said. "It's Keanu," he said. "I need a favor." Jackson Hayes was a retired Marine and a former military investigator Keanu had met while volunteering at a shelter near El Paso. The man had a knack for sniffing out corruption and a quiet fury about veterans being used as marketing props. They hadn't spoken in months, but when Keanu explained the situation, there was no hesitation. "Send me the names. I'll start digging. I need everything: contracts, backdoor filings, shell company registrations." Jackson grunted. "You'll have it by tonight. And Keanu? Yeah. Be careful. If this guy was erased, someone's playing for keeps." Keanu ended the call and immediately texted his lawyer, Eliza Tran, with a simple message. "Emergency. I need help verifying non-profits and any recent civil claims filed against Homes for Honor, Ryland's firm, or any of their subcontractors. Priority 1. Call me when you're free." He leaned back in his seat and exhaled, the edges of his thoughts tightening. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was preparing. Then he reached again for Adrian's letter. He unfolded it slowly and scanned the second page. He hadn't noticed it before, but toward the bottom, the writing changed. More rushed, as if written in low light or under pressure. There were names and dates. Keanu read them out loud in a whisper. Matthew Kloss, overdose, 2021. Regina Navarro, auto accident, head trauma. Brandon Fells, suicide, no note. Keanu stared at the names, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced a line beneath them. It wasn't just a list, it was a pattern. People Adrian had known. People who, at one point or another, had worked for the same nonprofit, or one of its contractors. He passed the letter to Detective Mendez, who had returned to her seat to finalize the team's departure. "Look at this," Keanu said. 3 people, dead in 2 years, all of them touched by Homes for Honor. Mendez took the page and read quickly. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened. "We already had files on 2 of these names," she admitted. Kloss and Navarro. Adrian flagged them in a prior interview last year, but there wasn't enough to act. No foul play officially listed, no toxicology irregularities. But he insisted something felt wrong. Keanu sat forward. "And now he's gone." "We're treating it seriously," Mendez replied. "But so far, it's all circumstantial." Keanu's jaw clenched. "It's not circumstantial to him. Look at his handwriting here. It's rushed. He was running out of time. He picked up the page again, noticing the very last line scrawled at the bottom, barely legible, almost an afterthought. If you're reading this, I've already lost. The words struck like a blade. Keanu went silent for several seconds. His hand closed into a fist beside the letter. He didn't notice until his knuckles turned pale. "No," he whispered. Then he raised his head and looked directly at Mendes. "No, he hasn't." She met his gaze. "I'm in this," Keanu said. "All the way. I'm not just lending a name this time. I want access to everything. Every document he flagged. Every internal memo. Every contract with fake companies. I'll talk to Adrian's widow, and after that, I want to speak to whoever was on the board during those financial years. Quietly, privately, before they know I'm involved." Mendes didn't hesitate. "We'll get you the full file, and I'll assign a liaison to stay in touch with you around the clock." Keanu nodded. Then he pulled out his phone again and called a second number. An old contact at a veteran advocacy group that specialized in protecting whistleblowers. A woman named Grace answered. "Keanu," she said, surprised. "I need your help," he said. "Someone's been trying to speak up about corruption in a housing nonprofit. He's gone missing, and I think others who tried were killed." There was silence for a moment. Then Grace said, "How soon do you need me?" "Yeah, I'm in D.C., but I can fly out by tomorrow morning. I'll bring what I have on shell companies tied to veterans programs." "Thank you," Keanu said. "This one's personal." As the line disconnected, he looked again at the letter and thought about Adrian's eyes the night they sat together outside the center. Quiet eyes. Heavy eyes. Now he understood what they had been carrying. The cabin had cleared. Detective Mendes and her team were prepping to board their own flight. Officer Garland remained behind, now officially assigned to accompany Keanu. She stood near the aircraft door, giving him space but staying alert. Her body language was different from the others, quieter but just as committed. Keanu sat alone for a moment longer, staring at the name Adrian Soto on the outside of the envelope. It wasn't the name of a celebrity or a billionaire or someone the world would mourn on a global stage, but it was the name of a man who had tried in silence, in fear, in integrity. He tucked the letter into the inner pocket of his jacket and stood. Then he turned to Garland, his wife, as soon as possible. "She's at her sister's house in Pasadena," Garland replied. "We can be there in 30 minutes. She's expecting us." As they stepped down the stairs onto the tarmac, the heat of the Los Angeles morning pressed into Keanu's skin, but the air felt different now, sharper, weighted. The ground crew stayed out of the way, avoiding eye contact, unsure what had just unfolded inside the jet. A black government vehicle waited at the edge of the runway. Garland opened the door for him, and Keanu slid in without a word. During the ride, he pulled out his phone again and scrolled through old text threads. There it was, Christopher Ryland's number. A few messages from 4 years ago, mostly logistics about event timing, donation press releases, and board invitations. Keanu had never responded to. He typed a new message. "We need to talk, privately. No cameras, just you and me. You know why." He hit send. Garland glanced over from the driver's seat. "You really think he's at the center of this?" Keanu looked out the window as city streets rolled by. "I think he built the shell," he said. "Whether he filled it with poison or let someone else do it, he's responsible. And I want to hear what he has to say before he knows the rest is coming." Garland nodded. "You're not like most people we work with." "I'm not trying to be," Keanu replied. As they pulled onto a quiet residential street, Keanu felt the shift in his chest. Not anxiety, not dread. Focus. This wasn't about reputation. This was about finishing what Adrian started. About reopening every door he'd knocked on and been ignored. About giving his warning the volume it deserved. When Garland parked in front of a modest stucco home, Keanu stepped out first. He looked at the front door, took a breath, and walked toward it. Not as a star, not as a symbol, but as a man who had finally decided to stand between silence and truth. And this time, he wasn't leaving until someone answered. The drive to the Veterans Center in Flagstaff was silent. Keanu sat in the passenger seat beside Officer Garland, his hands resting in his lap, eyes locked on the desert road. Every turn of the landscape reminded him of memories he hadn't planned to revisit. Sunset over red clay hills, the smell of sage in the air, and the quiet dignity of men rebuilding themselves one step at a time. It had once been a place of healing, but now it was a crime scene that hadn't been declared. The facility hadn't changed much. Same rusted gate, same hand-painted sign. Honor is a new beginning. Garland parked near the front entrance, and they stepped out into the thick, midday heat. Inside, a woman behind the reception desk looked up as they entered. Her name tag read, Lauren. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, but her eyes flicked to Keanu with recognition. Garland stepped forward. "We're here regarding Adrian Soto. We understand you worked with him." Lorraine's face changed instantly. Her shoulders stiffened, and her voice dropped. "Yes, of course. Adrian was on night duty, but we'd see him in passing. He was always kind, helped me carry packages when the delivery guys wouldn't." "We're trying to establish a timeline," Garland said. "His last day here, anything unusual?" Lorraine hesitated, then looked at Keanu again. "There was a man," she said. "Tall, black suit, expensive looking. Not someone from here. He asked to speak with Adrian privately." They went outside near the west lot. Adrian came back inside, about 15 minutes later. His hands were shaking. Keanu stepped closer. "Did you hear anything they said?" She shook her head. "No, but Adrian looked haunted. I asked if he was okay. He smiled, like it didn't reach his eyes, said, 'Just a misunderstanding.' But he didn't look convinced." "Do you have security footage from that day?" Garland asked. Lorraine bit her lip. "I thought we did, but when we checked after he disappeared, that day's file was missing. Just that one." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Deleted?" "The system says it was a recording error, but that's never happened before." "Who maintains the system?" Garland asked. "Or it guy?" "Marcus Weller. He's been here for years. He might have backed it up. I'm not sure." "Can we speak to him?" Garland asked. Lorraine nodded quickly. "He's in the basement server room. I'll call him." Minutes later, Marcus, a lanky man in his 40s, wearing a faded hoodie, led them down a narrow hallway toward a locked maintenance room. "I heard what happened to Adrian," he said. "I tried pulling the file. It was gone. But I'm a bit of a hoarder. I'd made a manual backup on an old drive. It's corrupted, but I've been trying to recover it." Garland looked at him. "How corrupted?" Marcus shrugged. "It's rough. Choppy. But parts of it play." "Show us," Keanu said. The small server room buzzed with the low hum of outdated fans and blinking hardware. Marcus moved quickly to his workstation, booting up a dusty laptop connected to an external drive with tape wrapped around it. On the drive, a hand-scrawled label read, "CCTV, Sept 18. Back." He clicked open a folder, then selected a file marked Westlot_cam3_partial_recovered. "This was the only one I could salvage," Marcus explained. "Most of the Westlot footage was overridden, but this clip started playing 2 nights ago. I was going to send it to the director, but when I saw what was on it, I wasn't sure who to trust." Garland leaned in beside him. Keanu stood just behind them, his arms crossed, heart already tightening. The video began in grainy black and white, a wide shot of the rear parking lot. The date stamp read 9/18, 3:14 p.m. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Adrian appeared from the left side of the screen. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, wearing the same black polo and khakis he'd worn every time Keanu had seen him. Seconds later, two men entered the frame from the opposite end. One was in a black suit, polished shoes catching a faint glint from the overhead sun. The other wore a gray shirt with no logos, but his stance was unmistakably tactical, feet squared, scanning the lot like someone trained. The man in the suit held something in his hand. A folder. He opened it, pulled out a photograph, and held it up in front of Adrian's chest. Adrian stepped back. Even in the low-resolution feed, his posture changed completely. Shoulders tensed, arms stiffened, his lips moved, clearly speaking, but there was no audio. The man in the suit took one step closer, gesturing with the photo. The second man, the one in gray, stood behind Adrian now. Not touching him, but close enough to box him in. Then Adrian looked away. He looked down. He raised a hand to his head, almost as if dizzy, then took another step back, breaking the triangle they had formed. The man in the suit slowly returned the photo to the folder, nodded once, and both men turned and walked out of frame. Adrian stood there alone for another minute. He looked up toward the building, toward the camera, and rubbed his face. Then he walked inside. The screen froze. "That's all I've got," Marcus said. "The footage cuts there. Everything else from that day is gone, erased clean, not just deleted, purged." Keanu stared at the frozen image. Adrian's face, caught in a single frame, wasn't angry, wasn't defiant. It was scared. Who was being threatened? Keanu said quietly. And he knew it. Marcus turned to Keanu, voice quiet. "I've seen a lot of odd things on this property. Homeless guys sneaking in, fights in the common rooms. But I've never seen Adrian like that. He wasn't scared of much. That day, he looked cornered." Garland reached for her phone and took a screenshot of the paused frame. "We can enhance this back at the lab. Might get facial recognition from the guy in the suit or the one shadowing him." Keanu didn't move. He continued staring at the frozen image. Adrian, alone in the lot, shoulders hunched, his body holding more emotion than a dozen paragraphs ever could. He didn't need audio. He could feel it. The threat wasn't just implied, it was direct, quiet, intentional. "Whoever they are," Keanu said, "they didn't come to warn him, they came to stop him." Garland nodded. "We've seen this kind of setup before. Private security with deep ties. Always off the books, just enough distance from corporate entities to provide plausible deniability." Marcus cleared his throat and pointed toward the monitor again. "That guy in the suit? I didn't get a good look at his face, but I've seen him before. He showed up last year for a board meeting. He wasn't introduced, just stood in the back near Rylan and left before the press arrived." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "You're sure he was with Rylan?" "I'd bet on it," Marcus replied. "We all assumed he was a fixer, you know, those consultants who don't ask for name badges." Garland typed notes into her phone. "That tracks. We've been compiling names tied to Ryland's former ventures. There's one firm that comes up again and again. Red Mesa Tactical. It's a private security group founded by a former defense contractor. No public website, just a shell corporation listed in Delaware and 3 P.O. boxes across state lines." Keanu tilted his head. "And Ryland's connected to them?" "He's not listed as an owner," Garland said, "but there are fund transfers from one of his subsidiaries, roughly $180,000, 0 cents over a 2-year period. Labeled as Facility Assessment and Safety Consulting." Keanu's hands curled slowly. "They weren't assessing facilities. They were silencing people." Garland said nothing. Neither did Marcus. Because there was no denying it anymore. Whoever Adrian had gone up against, whatever he had uncovered, he hadn't just been facing bureaucracy or greed. He'd been facing people with reach, with resources, with enough power to erase surveillance, manipulate nonprofits, and erase digital trails without blinking. Keanu turned to Marcus. "Keep that file hidden. Offline, lock it down. If anyone comes asking, you never saw it. Marcus nodded. Garland looked at Keanu. What now? Keanu's voice was quiet but resolved. Now we find out who was in that photo, the one they showed him. Because whatever scared Adrian that badly, it wasn't just about money. And for the first time, Keanu felt the size of the fight Adrian had been pulled into. And now he was in it too. The house was modest, a single-story home tucked into a quiet neighborhood just outside Pasadena. Adrian's wife, Elena Soto, answered the door herself. Her face was tired, lined with the kind of grief that sits beneath the skin rather than on the surface. But when she saw Keanu, her eyes softened. "You came," she said simply. He nodded. "I had to." They didn't talk much at first. She invited him and Officer Garland into the living room, where the blinds were drawn and a framed photo of Adrian in uniform sat beside a half-burnt candle. There was no pretense, no small talk. "I found something," Elena said, sitting slowly on the edge of the couch. "After they took his computer, I started going through the house. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel close to him." She reached down and slid out a small black case from under the coffee table. She opened it and handed Keanu a weathered notebook, wrapped in an elastic band and secured by a tiny lock that had been clipped off. "I found it behind the panel in our bedroom closet. He must have cut a square into the drywall and sealed it again with tape. I never saw it until I was cleaning." Keanu took the notebook in both hands. It felt heavier than it looked, the kind of weight that doesn't come from pages but from what they carry. When he opened it, the first few pages were filled with numbers. Handwritten columns, payment records, company names. Then came maps. Not printed maps, but hand-drawn, like a soldier sketching out a mission plan. Circles marked locations with dates beside them. Tiny details, like utility sheds and security camera angles. Elena leaned forward. "I think he knew they were watching him." Garland stood behind the couch, reading over Keanu's shoulder. "These entries go back almost 3 years. Then Keanu turned a page and stopped. A single sentence, underlined in red ink. "Bill paid $1.20 M from Rise Fund. No shelter ever built." Garland froze. Rise. That's the Veterans Relief Trust tied to congressional matching grants. That money's federally monitored. Keanu's voice was low. "Cry is Riling, Christopher Riling." He turned the page. There were photographs clipped to the notebook, printouts from satellite images, and grainy stills of empty land plots that were supposed to house veterans. One entry was dated a year prior. "Drove by the Chandler site today. Still nothing. Just a sign in the dirt. Rise banner fluttering, but no crew. No permits." I called the city. They said the project was denied twice. Yet the fund dispersed last fall. Elena wiped her eyes as she spoke. "He spent nights in here. Hours at a time. I thought he was reading, but he was documenting all of this, in silence." Keanu turned to another page. This time the words struck deeper than figures or fraud. "Many used my army buddies to cover up the scam. Told them it was for security, vetting suppliers, but they didn't know. They thought they were helping." Keanu's grip on the journal tightened as he reread the line. "They used my army buddies to cover up the scam." He could picture Adrian writing it, alone in this house, pen dragging across the page late at night, carrying not just evidence, but guilt. Not for what he'd done, but for what had been done in the name of service. In the name of brotherhood. Garland leaned in, scanning the next few pages. "These aren't just notes," she said. "This is a full-blown case file. He was compiling evidence like a prosecutor." Maps turned into lists. Lists turned into cross-references. On one page, Adrian had made a flow chart showing how funds were moved between charities, into Ryland's consulting firm, and then funneled into land purchases that never developed. He'd even included side-by-side comparisons of construction timelines from other legitimate veterans organizations, with notes like, "Real Shelter Project, Permits approved 4/10. Foundation poured 6/5. MR site. Funding approved 3/2. No permit filed. No contractor hired. In the margins, Keanu spotted personal comments, not just data. No one's listening. But I have to try. He wouldn't remember me, but I think Reeves is the only one who might care. If they erase me, at least maybe he'll see this. Keanu's eyes dropped for a moment. He closed the book, holding it gently in both hands, as if it might crumble from the weight of what was written inside. Garland looked at him. This isn't just fraud, this is betrayal. Keanu nodded. Of everyone who ever believed in what we were building. Elena stood and walked slowly to the hallway, then returned with a smaller notebook, one of Adrian's pocket journals. She handed it to Keanu. He kept that with him everywhere. It's not as detailed, but he used it like a log. He never let it out of his sight. I found it in his car. Keanu opened it. The first page had a simple message scrawled across the top. They'll try to bury me, but I'll leave the shovel behind. The room went quiet. Garland checked her phone. Detective Mendez just texted. She's pulling banking records that match the Rise Fund payouts. There are already overlaps with 3 of the sites Adrian flagged. Elena looked at Keanu. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted it to stop. Keanu reached over and gently touched her hand. He was a hero anyway. She nodded, eyes full. He stood, both journals in hand. I want copies made, and I want to bring this directly to Mendez personally. No couriers, no emails. Someone's already tried to erase him once. Garland nodded. I'll arrange it. As Keanu turned to leave, he paused in the doorway, then looked back at Elena. I know I didn't know him like you did, he said, but I'm going to make sure the world hears what he tried to say. Elena didn't speak. She just gave a single, broken nod and watched the man her husband once trusted walk out into the sunlight, carrying the last words he ever wrote. By the following morning, the story had leaked. Keanu's plane being grounded at Van Nuys Airport was no longer just a private disruption. It had become front-page news. A grainy photo snapped by a long-lens camera showed 4 black SUVs parked around his jet, with police stepping onto the stairs. No context, no facts, just the image. Speculation exploded. Headlines flooded the internet. Ill-greeted Keanu Reeves stopped by authorities before takeoff. Police intervened. Is the actor under investigation? Insider sources say federal agents interrogated Reeves on his plane. The tabloids ran wild. Pundits debated. Gossip sites churned out wild theories. Everything from drug smuggling to tax evasion to claims he was being secretly recruited by an intelligence agency. Keanu didn't respond. His publicist released a short, sterile statement. Mr. Reeves is fully cooperating with local authorities regarding an undisclosed matter. He has not been detained or charged. But the silence only deepened the speculation. Then, without warning, Christopher Ryland made a statement of his own. Standing on the steps of a gleaming high-rise downtown, flanked by publicists and attorneys, Ryland wore a tailored navy suit and a rehearsed half-smile. This appears to be an unfortunate distraction, he said to the cameras. My former colleagues and I remain committed to serving our veteran communities with transparency. I have no personal knowledge of any wrongdoing involving Mr. Reeves, but I hope that his situation is resolved quickly so we can return to the real work. Keanu watched the footage from the back seat of Garland's car, his jaw tight. Ryland had turned it into theater, discredit by distancing, smile for the cameras, control the narrative. He said nothing in response. Instead, he asked Garland to drive him somewhere else. Adrian's mother lived in a quiet apartment in Reseda, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a low-income senior housing complex. She had been advised to keep a low profile after the investigation reopened. No interviews, no statements. But when she heard Keanu was asking to visit, she said yes. She opened the door in a faded robe, her silver hair tied back with a clip. Her eyes were already red. She didn't offer a smile. She didn't need to. "Come in," she said, her voice thin. Keanu stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper and boiled tea. Photos of Adrian lined the narrow hallway, one in uniform, one from high school graduation, one holding a fish with a wide grin. When she sat down across from him in her small living room, she held one of the photos in her lap. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, in a whisper, she said, "My boy trusted you." Keanu bowed his head. "And I failed him." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "You're here now. That means you haven't." He reached out and gently covered her hand. "I won't let them bury him." She closed her eyes and held back tears. "Please, don't let them turn him into nothing." That night, Keanu sat alone in a small guest room provided by one of Mendes's colleagues. It was modest. Plain white walls, a lamp on a nightstand, and a wooden desk tucked beneath a window facing the back alley. It was quiet, and for the first time in days, no one was knocking on his door or asking for a statement. The weight of the last 48 hours sat heavily in his chest. He pulled Adrian's journal from his bag and opened it again, this time to the back. Taped to the final page was a small USB drive. Black, unmarked. It wasn't in any of the digital files Mendes's team had reviewed. No log of it, no backup. He stared at it for a moment before plugging it into the secure laptop Garland had handed him earlier that day. The screen blinked, then opened a folder marked simply Echo. Inside, 2 files. One document labeled crossref_funding_V3GXJX. More spreadsheets, likely what Adrian had been preparing to share. And one audio file, created by titled Red Light _817 MP3. Keanu hesitated for a breath. Then he clicked it. The audio was grainy, background noise, faint engine sounds, like a car idling. Then came voices. The first was Adrian's. "You said this wasn't about threats. You said we were going to fix it from the inside." The next voice was unmistakable, even distorted, even low. "Christopher Rylan. I said you needed to stop digging, Adrian. That's what I said. You're not a cop and you're not a lawyer. You're a temp. One who already knows what happens to people who ask too many questions." Silence. Then Adrian again. "Is that a threat?" Ryland. "No. It's a reminder. You want to end up like Carson? Gone one day, no trace the next? You'll disappear just like the last guy. They'll blame it on stress, PTSD. You'll be another vet no one asks about. Another case closed." Adrian didn't reply. The car door opened, closed again, then silence. Keanu hit pause. His jaw was locked, his breath shallow. He hit play again, let it repeat. And again, and again. He stared at the screen, the weight of the moment closing in like a fog. This wasn't theory anymore. This wasn't suspicion or circumstantial whispers. It was evidence, undeniable. He saved the file to 3 separate drives, one for Mendes, one to stay offline, one for Grace, who was flying in the next morning. He wrote a short message with it. "Do not send via email, hand deliver only." Then he pulled out a legal pad and began writing. A timeline, names, sites Adrian had flagged, Ryland's known business holdings, every thread that might tie to the voice on that recording. At the top of the page he wrote one word, "Adrian," and just beneath it, "They tried to erase you, now we erase them." He sat back in the chair, eyes heavy, but sleep wouldn't come. Not until the world heard what Adrian Soto died trying to say, and not until those who silenced him faced the truth. Keanu didn't want a stage. He didn't want lights or networks or the kind of polished spectacle that came with movie premieres and Hollywood charity drives. This wasn't a show, it was a reckoning. So when he agreed to speak publicly, he asked for one thing. Let it happen at the Veterans Center. Not in LA, not in a corporate setting, not in front of a studio audience. but in front of the place where Adrian had first taken a stand. The old facility in Flagstaff was cleaned up and prepared, its front courtyard arranged with a single wooden podium and 2 rows of chairs. Mendez coordinated the security detail personally. 1 news crew was invited, just 1. A trusted, nonpartisan journalist who had built a reputation on integrity over clicks. There were no press packets, no preview statements, no rehearsed talking points. When Keanu arrived that morning, he walked in wearing a simple black jacket and jeans. No handlers, no assistants. Adrian's mother walked beside him, slow but steady. Detective Mendez followed closely, holding a sealed envelope containing the USB drive and a summary of the investigation's findings to date. The camera crew was already in place, their equipment small and efficient. Keanu stood quietly near the podium as the small crowd of veterans, volunteers, and community members gathered. The wind was soft, rustling the flags hanging overhead. No one spoke. Then he stepped forward. He gripped the edges of the podium with both hands. A single sheet of paper rested in front of him, but he didn't look down. His eyes were heavy, yet steady. He began, "A few days ago, I was preparing to fly to Oregon for a private visit with some veterans. But my plane never left the ground, because a man, one most of you never knew, tried to reach me before he disappeared." He paused, swallowing hard. His name was Adrian Soto. He was a veteran, a security guard, a husband, a son. And for the last 3 years of his life, he was also a witness. He found something he shouldn't have had to carry alone. He took a breath, and he left that truth for me. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out the small black journal. This book contains dates, payments, land records, fake bids, and empty promises. It shows how funds meant to build shelters for veterans were funneled through shell companies, concealed by legal layers, and ultimately used to line the pockets of people in power. He raised the journal. "This is the truth," Adrian tried to share. He looked out at the small crowd. "And now, it's mine to carry." Mendez stepped forward and placed the sealed envelope on the podium. "This is the audio file Adrian recorded weeks before his disappearance. In it, a man we've identified as Christopher Rylan warns Adrian that if he doesn't stop asking questions, he'll disappear like the last guy." Gasps echoed from the crowd. Keanu's jaw clenched. Adrian didn't disappear because he got tired. He didn't vanish because he gave up. He was silenced. Keanu paused to steady his breath. His voice had stayed even, but his hands trembled slightly at the edges. He looked out into the audience. The veterans sitting there weren't politicians. They weren't corporate leaders. They were people, like Adrian, quiet, loyal, and often overlooked. "We trusted a lie," Keanu said. "All of us, me included." He glanced down, then raised his eyes again. "I stood next to Christopher Rylan at fundraisers. I let them use my face on brochures. I believed in the mission, and I believed in the men and women behind it. But Adrian saw what it had become. He saw that veterans were being used as cover, that money meant for housing and healing was being siphoned off, that shelters were promised but never built." His voice cracked slightly as he went on, and he tried to stop it. Keanu gestured toward Adrian's mother, seated near the front row. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her face marked by a grief that had settled too deep to be released with tears. He didn't have a media team. He didn't have lawyers. He didn't have protection. All he had was this journal, a few flash drives, and the belief that if he left it in the right hands, someone would listen. He took a breath. "I'm listening now." Mendez stepped up beside him again and handed a copy of the journal to the reporter from the invited crew. The journalist accepted it silently, already recording. "We're releasing this to the public today," Keanu continued. "Every document, every timestamp, every payment trail. We are calling for a full audit of Homes for Honor and every connected nonprofit. We are filing requests for a congressional review of the RISE Fund and its oversight failures." He looked directly into the camera. "And we are naming names. Christopher Rylan, Arkwood Consulting, Red Mesa Tactical, Vanguard Community Holdings. These are the entities listed in Adrian's records. These are the people who profited while shelters stood empty and veterans were left to sleep on concrete. The crowd stayed silent, but there was tension in the air now. Rage, sorrow, recognition. Then came the question. From the back, the reporter asked, "Why didn't you speak up earlier?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Because I didn't know," he answered plainly, "but now I do. And I'm all in." He placed both hands on the podium again, grounding himself. "I'm dedicating the next year, at least, to supporting transparency in charitable funding. I will work with veteran watchdog groups, legal teams, and federal agencies to ensure every dollar is traced. I'm not doing this to clear my name. I'm doing this because Adrian shouldn't have had to carry it alone." He stepped back from the microphone. For a moment, no one moved. Then one man in the crowd stood, then another, and another. No applause, just presence. Veterans from across the country began sharing Adrian's name online. The journal trended within hours. The audio file reached Capitol Hill by the end of the day, and in the center of it all stood Keanu Reeves. Not as a celebrity, but as a man who chose to carry the truth and refused to let it be buried again. 3 days after the press conference, the backlash began. Keanu's legal team received the first formal notice, a cease and desist letter from a top-tier law firm representing Christopher Ryland and 2 of his affiliated companies. It was thick, filled with legal language accusing Keanu of willful defamation, public character assassination, and reckless dissemination of unverified claims. The letter threatened litigation. The same day, 2 of Keanu's long-standing corporate sponsors quietly ended their partnerships. No explanation, just closed contracts and silence. A watch company pulled his ad from their homepage. A streaming platform paused a planned film announcement without warning. Online, the narrative began to splinter. Supporters rallied behind him, but bots and critics tried to spin the story. Some claimed he was being used by political interests. Others accused him of trying to resurrect a fading public image. Anonymous trolls questioned Adrian's credibility, calling him unstable and a disgruntled employee. Keanu didn't respond publicly. Not once. Instead, he sat with his lawyer, Eliza Tran, in a small office downtown, reviewing a new 36-page complaint filed by Ryland's team in federal court. It was aggressive, strategic, designed to distract. Eliza closed the folder and looked at Keanu. "They're playing the long game, trying to scare you into retreating." Keanu looked calm. "Then they're wasting their time." He stood and walked to the whiteboard at the end of the room. On it were 4 simple words. "Head the truth." Underneath, taped to the board, was the last line from Adrian's journal. "If they erase me, let someone else speak." That afternoon, without fanfare, Keanu filed the paperwork for a new nonprofit, the Soto Initiative, named in full honor of Adrian Soto. Its mission, to support and protect whistleblowers in the nonprofit sector, especially veterans, service members, and contractors. Keanu personally funded the first year of operating costs, brought Grace in as interim director, and quietly recruited pro bono legal support from 3 of the top investigative firms in the country. No press release, no gala, just a website with Adrian's photo and the tagline, "Humbled voice is never too small to be heard." Meanwhile, Detective Mendez called with an update. "The case is growing," she said. "The DOJ has picked it up. We've got the attention of the Office of Inspector General, and Homeland Security's Financial Crimes Unit is now involved." Keanu stood silent on the line. Mendez continued. "Ryland's firm is being investigated for wire fraud, fraudulent grant filings, and obstruction. And there's more. We found a direct link between 2 of his shell companies and a political action committee that received filtered donations from the Rise Fund." Keanu closed his eyes and nodded. "It's bigger than we thought." It always is, Mendez said, but thanks to Adrian, we finally have enough to pull the thread. That night, Keanu received an email from an address he didn't recognize. It was a short message from a young Marine named Isaac Torres. I met Adrian 2 years ago when I came to the center. He used to walk the halls at night and check on us. One night, he sat with me for an hour after I nearly relapsed. I didn't know he was dealing with all of that, but I do now. He saved my life. His truth gave me strength. Thank you for honoring him. Keanu's eyes welled up. The morning headlines were brutal. Keanu's crusade or career suicide, one asked. Another read, Reeves defames national hero, beneath an image of Rylan in uniform, cropped and color-corrected to tug at patriotic emotions. Keanu didn't respond. Not publicly, not through agents or press reps. Instead, he sat with his legal team at a long oak table in a quiet downtown office, listening as his lawyer, Geneva Chen, laid out the storm. Rylan has filed a defamation suit. He's claiming reputational damage, emotional distress, and, get this, interference with future employment. Keanu raised an eyebrow. What future employment? He was forced to resign. Geneva gave a tired smile. Doesn't matter. It's about the narrative now. His lawyer is smart. They're using this to paint you as a vigilante celebrity. But the investigation is real, Mendez added. He was also in the room, flanked by 2 federal investigators who had quietly taken over the case. This isn't some Hollywood stunt. Geneva nodded. I believe you. But sponsors don't care about truth. They care about image. We've already lost 2 partnerships. More will follow. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. He could feel the weight pressing in. But it wasn't fear that tightened his chest. It was clarity. He stood up slowly and said, "Then we make this bigger than me." Geneva looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm not going to defend myself," Keanu said. "I'm going to defend the ones who can't." That evening, with no press release, no flashy rollout, and no cameras present, a quiet filing was submitted to the state. A new nonprofit was born, the Soto Initiative, named after Adrian Soto, the man whose journal had changed everything. Its mission was simple: to protect whistleblowers in high-risk environments, especially within military and intelligence communities. Anonymous legal support, emergency housing, mental health coverage, confidential legal filings. The name alone struck an emotional chord. Within hours, military forums were sharing the news. But the world didn't notice the most powerful moment. It happened in Keanu's kitchen. He was rinsing a plate when a new email came in. Just one line, no signature, no fluff. Adrian saved my life. His truth gave me strength to get clean. Keanu stood frozen. The water ran over his hands, turning cold. He didn't know who had written it. He didn't need to. He turned to Mendez, who had just walked in with case updates. "This is why it matters," Keanu said softly, handing over the phone. Mendez read the message. There was a pause, a kind of quiet reverence. Then Keanu added, "If telling the truth costs me everything, it's still worth it." That line hung in the air like a bell strike. Mendez nodded. "The feds agree. They're opening a formal inquiry into Rylan's unit and several connected contractors. Your testimony will be requested." Keanu gave a faint smile. "I'll be there." It wasn't a moment of heroism or cinematic flair. It was just a man, weary but grounded, ready to take the next step into a storm he hadn't asked for but wouldn't turn away from. As reporters shouted outside his gate the next morning, Keanu stepped onto the porch with no statement. Just a hand on his chest, then a nod. Inside, the Soto Initiative website went live, and somewhere across the country, a broken vet stared at the homepage and whispered, "Finally!" It began with a knock on Mendez's door just after midnight. Not the front door of his office, but his apartment, 6 floors above a quiet street in Santa Monica. The man standing there wore a hooded windbreaker and kept his eyes down. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Mendes didn't call for backup. His instinct told him this wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The man handed him a thumb drive, wrapped in a dry-leaving receipt. "I worked for the PR firm that managed Ryland's image during his contracting years," he said. "There's more going on than you think." Mendes narrowed his eyes. "Why now?" The man glanced down the hallway. "Because I signed an NDA 6 years ago that just expired, and because I saw what you're doing." Before Mendes could ask his name, the man disappeared into the stairwell. 2 hours later, Mendes sat alone in a dimly lit analysis room. The contents of the thumb drive were staggering. Dozens of internal memos, strategized media responses, emails with defense contractors, military liaisons, even legal teams. Most disturbing were the project files buried inside a folder labeled long-term containment. There were names, dates, settlements. Adrian Soto's name appeared 5 times. 3 redacted memos suggested that Adrian had threatened to go public in 2017, 2019, and again in early 2022. Each time, his direct employer reassigned him. The last reassignment sent him to the Nevada desert to oversee what was called Project Emberlight. But that wasn't the worst of it. Another file had a simple title, Operation Nightlight, Eliminate Liabilities. The document included coded summaries, internal HR reports flagged for emotional deviation, termination protocols, and quiet payoffs to family members. Buried beneath, a second file stopped Mendes cold. It read, Watch KR, Proximity Risk. Attached was a grainy photo of Keanu at a charity event, shaking hands with a project lead from the same contracting group that employed Adrian. Below the image, a timestamp. 2 weeks before Adrian disappeared. Mendes didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, he was sitting across from Keanu, documents spread across a wide kitchen table. Keanu scanned the files slowly. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked up. "They used me." Mendes nodded. "They used your face, your reputation, your silence." Keanu stared at the grainy photo of himself, the one used to monitor his movements. It felt like looking at a ghost. His face was calm in the image, smiling even, but now it chilled him. This wasn't just about covering up fraud, Mendes said. They had systems in place, legal, financial, psychological. Adrian was one of many. Keanu's jaw tightened. How many others didn't make it this far? Too many, Mendes said. The room felt heavier now, not with fear, but with purpose. Keanu reached across the table and picked up a single printout. Adrian's last social media post before he vanished. It was a photo of a sunrise over a mountain range, with the caption, "Even if no one hears you, speak anyway." Keanu stared at the image. He knew. Mendes nodded. He always knew. Keanu didn't need more time to process. He rose from the table, walked over to the window, and stood in silence for several seconds. Then he turned around and said, "We're going to finish what he started." The investigation turned inward. Keanu began revisiting every event, fundraiser, and foundation meeting where he'd unknowingly stood beside those involved. Photos from years ago now felt poisoned. In one image, he was standing beside a man named George Toland, listed as the director of Project Emberlight. Keanu remembered chatting with him at a children's hospital ribbon-cutting ceremony. They'd talked about veterans' recovery programs. It had seemed harmless, supportive even. But the folder Mendes brought revealed something sinister. Project Emberlight was a cover. It had no clinical wing, no recovery reports, and no survivor feedback. It was a containment funnel, designed to isolate whistleblowers by assigning them to fictitious humanitarian roles, kept busy, under watch, until their silence was secure. Adrian had been one of the final transfers. Keanu paced his kitchen, documents scattered like puzzle pieces. His mind churned through the moments that now bore double meanings. He remembered the quiet resistance in Adrian's voice that day at the charity shoot, how he spoke about truth like it was oxygen. And Keanu had just thought he was grieving. "This runs deeper than we thought," Mendes said quietly. Keanu paused. "How long were they tracking me?" "According to the metadata in those files, over 3 years. You weren't the target. You were the brand. They used your presence to lend trust to the lie." Keanu sat down again, a long breath leaving his chest. "That makes me part of it." "No," Mendes replied. "That makes you the disruption they couldn't predict." Keanu studied the note from the whistleblower again, the man from the PR team. There was no name, but the drive contained one last folder labeled Deadweight. Inside were profiles of individuals deemed unstable, unpredictable, or vulnerable. Adrian's file was the most complete. It included psychological evaluations, income audits, flagged personal communications, even a list of friends and co-workers he was told to avoid. Next to each entry, an outcome: transferred, dismissed, terminated. Notices cease for 10 minutes until they're reasonably low. Keanu's name? Just one word: monitor. They didn't trust him, but they didn't think he'd fight back either. That assumption, Mendes said, was their greatest miscalculation. Hours later, Keanu sat alone, going through the images again. He landed on a photo he hadn't noticed before. Adrian and Keanu, side by side, smiling. Adrian was mid-laugh. It had been taken backstage at a charity banquet. Keanu remembered that night now. It had been the first time Adrian confided in him, not directly, but in parables. Stories about how silence kills, how institutions can smile while suffocating the truth. Keanu hadn't understood it then. He did now. He picked up a pen and wrote 2 names on a notepad: Adrian Soto and Operation Nightlight. Then, underneath, a phrase he hadn't spoken in decades. Eddie forgot, "I don't scare easy." Downstairs, Mendes was already working with the feds. New subpoenas were being drafted. Anonymous witnesses from other projects had begun to come forward. One woman, a former behavioral analyst, confirmed that staff were instructed to create emotional friction in targeted whistleblowers' lives, alienating them, gaslighting them, and, when needed, discrediting them publicly. Her final words in the deposition were chilling. They believed they just want silence, they wanted surrender. Keanu stared out the window of his study. Somewhere below, the world was moving on, unaware. But for the first time, he felt something more than grief or anger. He felt focused. The raid began just after 4:00 a.m. No news crews were alerted, no leaks to the press. The FBI moved in silence, dark vans rolling up in single file outside Ryland's private security firm. Agents stormed the offices with sealed warrants in hand, splitting into teams. Within the hour, dozens of hard drives, confidential files, and encrypted servers were seized. One by one, employees were questioned. Most were too stunned to speak. A few asked for lawyers. One, trembling, handed over a binder he'd been instructed to destroy the night before. It was filled with financial records, internal memos, and schedules tied directly to fake initiatives under the company's philanthropic umbrella. The names matched: Project Emberlight, Operation Nightlight. Even Adrian Soto's personnel file, complete with red-inked notes about his deviant loyalty and high threat to continuity. That same morning, a second raid unfolded across the city. The non-profit front, once praised for its Veterans Sesh mission, was locked down by federal agents. The foundation's president was placed in handcuffs. So were 2 board members and a private consultant with deep ties to government contractors. They weren't just accused of fraud. They were now being investigated for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possibly negligent homicide. But the most gut-wrenching news came shortly after. Detective Mendez received a call from a search and recovery unit dispatched to a mountainous canyon 3 hours outside of Los Angeles. Adrian Soto's body had been found. He had not died by suicide. The forensics report was clear. Blunt force trauma to the back of the head. No defensive wounds, no note, no indication of voluntary travel. Someone had left him there, at an overlook where tourists rarely ventured. Mendez drove in silence to Keanu's home. He didn't need to say much. When Keanu opened the door and saw his face, he already knew. There was no outburst, just a long, silent embrace between two men who had chosen to carry the weight of a truth others had buried. Later that week, Keanu stood beneath a gray sky, flanked by Adrian's mother and widow. The funeral was private, held on the same military base where Adrian had trained as a young recruit. Rows of uniforms lined the chapel. A folded flag rested on a velvet cushion. Keanu didn't speak during the eulogy. He didn't need to. When it was time, he walked forward, slowly, and stood beside the coffin. He laid his hand on the polished surface, eyes closed, his voice barely audible, but clear enough for those closest to hear. An employee who had watched from the entrance took a seat. The silence that followed was sacred. No cameras, no noise, just the ache of a loss too heavy for headlines. As the honor guard folded the flag with precision, Adrian's widow reached for Keanu's hand. They didn't speak. Their grief was shared, and in that, they found comfort. Later that evening, Keanu stood before a different audience, one filled with journalists, legislators, veterans, and families of whistleblowers who never got their justice. His voice, though tired, was steady. "We lost a good man, but we didn't lose his voice." Keanu's speech echoed through the chamber, not with theatrical power, but with moral gravity. The kind that made people lean in rather than pull away. There were no applause breaks, just stillness. He didn't read from a teleprompter. He carried a folded paper in his coat pocket but never pulled it out. Adrian Soto stood for something that made a lot of powerful people uncomfortable, he said. He believed truth should not be managed, that silence, when forced, becomes its own form of violence. He paused, scanning the faces in the room. Many were veterans, a few were lawmakers. Some were simply parents, holding the hands of young children who would never know the kind of man Adrian was. What he uncovered, Keanu continued, wasn't just corruption. It was calculated cruelty, the kind that hides behind polished smiles and charity slogans. A ripple moved through the chamber. "I was used," he admitted, without shame. "My image was used. My presence was used. They thought I'd smile and keep moving. But what they didn't realize, what they never calculated, was that I was paying attention." The line landed like a quiet strike, not angry, just awake. "In the end, Adrian gave everything," Keanu said, "but not in vain. His death will not go unanswered. His legacy is already working." Behind him, a screen lit up, showing the first draft of the Soto Reform Bill. The bill proposed sweeping changes to nonprofit oversight, whistleblower protections, and transparency mandates for any charity receiving federal or public contracts. But it didn't stop there. It also proposed independent third-party ombudsman programs inside large nonprofits and mandatory protection clauses for whistleblowers reporting ethical or financial misconduct. It was bold. It was overdue. And it was about to be introduced in 2 state legislatures and counting. Keanu didn't take credit. He simply nodded toward Adrian's mother in the front row. Had left behind more than pain. He left behind proof. After the speech, Keanu stepped off the stage and walked out a side door, avoiding reporters. He didn't want to be the story, not this time. Outside, he found Mendez waiting near a quiet corner of the courtyard. "Do you think it'll pass?" Keanu asked. Mendez nodded. "They're scared now, not because of you, but because they know there are more Adrians out there." Keanu looked up at the sky. The clouds had started to break, light streaking between them. What about the people who looked away, The ones who knew but didn't speak, he asked. Mendez sighed. They'll have to live with that, or they can start speaking now. Keanu didn't respond. Instead, he pulled from his coat pocket a small photo of Adrian. It was the one from their final day together, the charity event where everything had seemed normal, before the storm. He tucked it into the base of a memorial wall just behind the courtyard. No cameras, no ceremony, just remembrance. Hours later, the story broke nationally. Federal investigation confirms conspiracy behind veteran charity fraud. Adrian Soto's death-ruled homicide. Actor Keanu Reeves backs new national whistleblower law. But the headlines weren't what mattered. What mattered was that the silence had ended. It started with a letter. Not a typed message, not an email or a post on social media. An actual letter, folded carefully, with handwriting that wobbled in places but held every ounce of sincerity. It was addressed to Keanu Reeves, C/O, the Soto Initiative. The return name was simply Daniel, U.S. Army, retired. Inside, a note written in blue ink. Dear Mr. Reeves, I never thought someone like you would care about someone like me. When I spoke up years ago, I was told to shut up or disappear. I chose to disappear. But when I saw your face on TV, standing next to Adrian's mother, I came back to life. Thank you. There was no signature beyond that. Just the truth, laid bare in 6 short sentences. Keanu read it twice, then a third time, then placed it in a wooden box on his desk beside Adrian's photo. A week later, another arrived, this one from a former analyst at a health nonprofit. I always thought integrity was supposed to be quiet, but I see now that silence can be misused. I'm not ready to speak publicly, but I'm ready to help. The letters didn't stop. One came from a cafeteria worker who had seen shady inventory swaps during disaster relief, but was too afraid to document it. Another from a teen who had watched his father be dismissed from a government job after flagging inflated contracts. And then, a small envelope from a 5th grade student in Topeka, Kansas. The handwriting was rounded and careful. Dear Mr. Reeves, I saw your speech about Mr. Adrian. I watched it with my mom. I want to be brave like him, and a little like you too. When I grow up, I want to help people who are scared to tell the truth. Keanu folded that letter gently and placed it on top of the others. The words settled deep. He didn't feel brave, he felt responsible. It became clear that the fight wasn't over. It had only changed shape. That's when Keanu made the call, not to his publicist or agent, but to Geneva Chen, his lawyer, and to Mendez, who by now had become a quiet partner in the work. They met in a small office off Ventura Boulevard, rented out under the Soto Initiative. Keanu leaned forward and laid out a new vision. A place people can go, not just to speak, but to learn how to stand. Geneva nodded slowly. You're talking about moral education? I'm talking about mentorship, Keanu said. The kind we didn't get. The kind Adrian tried to give, even when it cost him. The next few months were quiet in the public eye, but behind closed doors, blueprints were drawn. A facility was secured, a modest, former high school campus repurposed as a center for ethical leadership, free expression, and whistleblower training. The name? The Soto Center for Moral Courage. Inside its walls, veterans would counsel young government interns. Former investigators would hold seminars on integrity under pressure. Journalists would teach the risks and power of speaking up. And every wall would bear one name: Soto. Opening day at the Soto Center wasn't marked by a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a televised special. There were no celebrity panels, no photo ops. Instead, it began with a single stool in the middle of the main auditorium and 20 folding chairs placed in a circle. Keanu stood at the center, holding a folder of the first 50 letters they'd received. Around him were veterans, teachers, healthcare workers, and 2 young interns who had just completed ethics training in Washington. One of them, A quiet girl named Lee had traveled overnight by bus just to attend. She'd been fired the month before after filing an inappropriate spending inside a children's relief program. She sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes lowered. When Keanu asked if she wanted to speak, she only nodded. "I thought it was my fault," she said softly. "That I didn't say it right, or to the right person." Keanu leaned in. "You said it. That was enough." The others in the room nodded. Later, Lee would be hired as one of the center's first research coordinators. Her courage would quietly shape how the center handled future reports. Word spread quickly. Within a month, the Soto Center had received over 700 new letters. Some came with documentation, some came anonymously. Some just came with a single sentence, like the one Keanu read silently one afternoon. "I left, but my guilt stayed." He stared at it for a long time. It was signed only with the initials D.F. Every week, Keanu read a few of the letters aloud to new visitors at the center. Not for drama, not for pity, but to remind everyone of the stakes. One day, an older man in a faded bomber jacket stood in the back of the room while Keanu read a message from a former Air Force mechanic. When Keanu finished, the man cleared his throat. "I knew Adrian," he said. "I trained him." All heads turned. He removed his cap slowly. "We knew something was wrong back then. Some of us looked away, not out of malice, just fear." No one interrupted. "I came today because I'm tired of pretending I didn't know better." He paused, then added, "Thank you for doing what we couldn't." Keanu stepped forward and shook the man's hand. That moment was never recorded, but it was felt. By winter, the Soto Center had launched 3 new pilot programs focused on ethical leadership in medicine, technology, and media. Each was led by people who had once been silenced. Keanu never sat at the head of any table. He showed up, he listened, he read letters, and he helped scrub the floor after workshops ended. It wasn't performative, it was personal. One evening, as he closed the door to the center, he noticed a fresh envelope taped to the glass. No stamp, no name, just a message written in thick black ink. "You helped me speak. Now I want to help someone else." Inside was a check, enough to fund another seminar, with a sticky note attached. "For the next, Adrian." Keanu held the note to his chest and whispered, "He's still here." Then he turned off the lights and walked into the night. Quiet, steady, and no longer alone. The envelope arrived without warning. No courier, no signature, no return address. It was slipped through the Soto Center's mail slot sometime between dusk and nightfall. The receptionist found it the next morning, sitting among a small stack of newsletters and workshop registrations. It was plain, off-white, sealed with a single strip of tape. Keanu noticed it immediately when he arrived. His name was written in capital letters across the front. No title, no initials, just K.E. He opened it in silence. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no greeting, no explanation, just one line, handwritten in tight black ink. "You only saw half of it. Look into Project Sanctum." No signature, no contact, just the words. He read it again, then again. Something about the precision of the handwriting, the sharp edges of each letter. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a key. Keanu brought it to Mendez. She was already at her desk when he arrived, sorting through a backlog of updates from agencies still reviewing the collapse of Ryland's charity structure. She looked up when she saw his face. He handed her the letter. She read it once, then leaned back in her chair. "Sanctum?" Keanu nodded. "Means sacred place, doesn't it?" "In Latin," she said. "But with people like this, it probably means something far less holy." Mendez opened her laptop and began running searches through the encrypted databases they'd acquired during the FBI raids. Dozens of false company names and shell organizations had already been linked to Ryland's network. Most shut down, some still under review. But Sanctum hadn't come up once. that didn't sit right. Keanu watched as Mendez narrowed the parameters. She shifted from financial ledgers to internal HR systems, looking for personnel flagged under special clearance levels or off-record project tags. Then it happened. A line of text popped up from a recovered contractor memo. Personnel reassigned to Sanctum Location 9/27. Full containment protocol. No external comms authorized. Mendez tapped the screen. That's 3 weeks before Adrian went missing. They stared at each other. Is it over? Keanu asked. Mendez didn't answer right away. She clicked through another tab, opening a folder marked D-Class Clearance Only. Inside was a list of names. A dozen employees who had vanished quietly over a 5-year span. Most were marked voluntary resignation. But beside a few, a second phrase appeared in red text. Transferred S9. She looked back at Keanu. This was only the beginning. He didn't say a word. He folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. That night, Keanu sat alone in the Soto Center's back office, staring at a map pinned to the wall. He didn't know what Project Sanctum was, but someone out there did. Someone who had been close enough to slip that envelope inside a building surrounded by federal scrutiny and constant observation. Whoever it was, they hadn't given up. Neither would he. By morning, the Soto Center was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become the front line. Again. Keanu moved with quiet precision. He gathered a team, not of lawyers or executives, but the same core group that had helped Adrian's story rise from silence. Mendez, Geneva, 2 federal contacts, and 1 quiet researcher named Halston, who had helped decode dozens of hidden files in the earlier raids. They sat together in the Soto Center's main conference room, the windows blacked out. The table covered with printed memos and encrypted drive readouts. Halston pulled up a screen with a list of words extracted from metadata hidden deep in the archived communications. One word kept reappearing. His smile. It's mine. Mendez leaned forward. We've seen it 3 times now, but never in anything public, only in buried internal logs. Geneva added, if Project Sanctum is real, S9 may be a location, possibly a facility, or worse, a cover for enhanced psychological suppression. Keanu looked down at the printed personnel list. Names tagged unavailable, transferred, on extended leave. But each had something in common: prior involvement with military nonprofits that had since been dissolved for ethical violations. One name stood out: Thomas Greer, a logistics manager who had testified in 2016 about missing aid supplies in Syria. His complaint had vanished. So had he. His file read, resigned 2017, no further contact. Mendez cross-referenced it. His last known entry badge pinged at a facility in northern Nevada, a decommissioned missile command post, now listed as private storage. Halston tapped on his keyboard, then froze. Site, he said quietly. It was renamed last year to Sanctum Solutions. The room went still. Keanu leaned forward. We need proof. They spent the next hours combing through satellite images, archived invoices, personnel assignments, and transportation logs. One pattern emerged: monthly truck deliveries that matched no known supplier codes, always at night, always unregistered. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure this place stayed invisible, but they had failed to account for persistence. By dusk, Mendez made a call to a federal agent in charge of the ongoing conspiracy investigation. He didn't promise action, but he listened. That night, Keanu took a walk through the Soto Center halls. The letters lining the walls seemed to speak louder than usual. One, in particular, stopped him. It was from a man who had once been labeled unstable by a government program and quietly dismissed. His letter ended with a sentence that now felt prophetic. Someday, someone will follow the thread they tried to bury. Keanu whispered to himself, we're following it now. The next morning, Mendez received a secure call from the Department of Justice. A black site investigation had been approved. Sanctum was officially on the radar. But that wasn't what shocked her. The official said, "We've found evidence that at least 4 of the missing personnel are still alive." Mendez didn't hesitate. She turned to Keanu and said, "It's not over." He nodded. Then quietly he opened a new file folder on the Soto Center's shared drive. He titled it simply, Adrian's Thread, and beneath it, a list of names that weren't going to be forgotten again. Not this time. The room was quiet, lit only by firelight and the gentle glow of a desk lamp in the corner. Outside the windows, the wind moved through the trees like a whispered memory. Keanu sat with a journal in his lap, legs folded, pen balanced between his fingers. He had written nothing for an hour. Instead, he stared at the open page, a blank sheet waiting not for poetry or speeches, but for something real, something that mattered. He glanced to his right, where Adrian's folded letter rested beneath a glass paperweight. It was worn now, creased at the edges from being opened too many times. The last line still haunted him, simple and final. "Please do what I couldn't. Tell the world." Keanu's eyes stayed on the page as he picked up the pen. He began slowly, each stroke deliberate. "Adrian, I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know what they'd done to you. But I know now. And I swear your name won't disappear again." He paused. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, and then went silent. Keanu continued, "You taught me that silence isn't neutral. It protects someone, and it's almost never the right person. Your courage didn't save you, but it saved others, and it changed me. I won't stop until every shadow you exposed has light on it." He stopped there, then gently closed the journal, resting both hands over it. There was nothing left to write. He rose from the chair and walked to the mantel above the fireplace. On it sat a single framed photo. Adrian in his training uniform, laughing beside a younger version of Keanu. It had been taken at a charity fitness challenge, years before any of this began. Keanu studied the image. He wasn't looking at a victim. He was looking at someone who had known the cost and still moved forward. Then, without fanfare, he turned toward the small camera that had been set up on a tripod across the room. It wasn't for broadcast, it wasn't for publicity. It was for the Soto Center's next group of students. Truth tellers in training. He clicked the button to begin. There was no script, no crew, only his voice. "If someone ever trusted you with their truth," he said softly, "don't waste it." He let the silence sit. "In not asking you to fix the world, just to carry the weight with them, even for a moment. That's enough to change everything." He reached for Adrian's letter, held it in his hand. This letter wasn't meant to be read by millions. It was meant to be buried. But someone passed it on. And I'm passing it to you. He folded it once more. Because courage is contagious. So is silence. And you have to choose which one you'll live with. The camera clicked off. He didn't play it back. He didn't need to. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. Inside, a truth had been spoken aloud. And somewhere, someone would hear it. The next morning, Keanu arrived early at the Soto Center. The halls were quiet, the lights low, but on every wall, the ripple of Adrian's story could be felt. Dozens of new photos had been added to the Courage Wall, portraits of whistleblowers, activists, silent helpers, and those who had lost their jobs just for doing the right thing. Beneath each one, a small plaque with a single line from their own letter, testimony or journal. He paused in front of a new edition. An anonymous letter from a nurse who had reported unsafe conditions in a veterans clinic. It read, "I didn't blow the whistle, I rang a bell, and nobody wanted to hear it." Keanu stood there for a long moment. He then continued down the hall to the library, where a group of young participants had just finished orientation. He wasn't scheduled to speak that day, but he asked for a chair in the circle. No cameras, no staff, just the next generation of watchers, thinkers, and truth-bearers. He listened. One woman spoke about her uncle, who had lost everything after testifying in a workplace abuse case. A young man talked about being threatened for exposing cheating in a school's grading system. Another had no story to tell yet, only the ache of watching her father regret his own silence years ago. Keanu didn't interrupt, but at the end, he stood up and said just one thing. Adrian didn't fight for himself. He fought for the ones who were still afraid. And now we get to be the ones who aren't. A few minutes later, he left the room. The conversations continued without him. That was the point. By evening, his simple fireside video had been uploaded to the Soto Center's internal site, then shared publicly by a staff member. By midnight, it had spread to platforms around the world. Within hours, it was titled in 1,000 different ways by viewers, but one theme kept repeating in comments. Don't waste the truth someone gave you. One woman wrote, "My sister told me her story 10 years ago. I didn't listen, but I will now." Another, "I've been carrying a truth that belongs in the light. You gave me courage." And then a third that Keanu would read aloud to a future class. "I'm scared, but scared is still a place to begin." Later that week, standing on the Soto Center's rooftop as the sun went down, Keanu took out Adrian's journal for the last time. He opened to the back cover. The page was blank except for one sentence, scribbled in crooked handwriting. "This wasn't for me. It was for whoever came next." Keanu smiled softly and closed it. Then he turned once more toward the viewer, this time for you. If you've made it this far in the story, you've felt the weight of truth. So now, let us ask you, have you ever kept quiet when you shouldn't have? Tell us in the comments. And if Adrian's story moved you, share it. Not for the clicks, not for the platform, but because someone, somewhere, is still whispering a truth that needs a voice. Maybe yours.